We're really glad to be talking with you today. And one of the things that we've done is we've structured a conversation that you'll be invited to be a part of. So please take the time to find your chat window as you're listening to us right now. The way you'll do that is you'll look at your control panel, and if you can't find your control panel, you'll toggle at the top of your screen, and the control panel will come down, and it will give you an option of more. Under more, you'll find the chat window, and there we'll ask you to be using that 2 or 3 times during the presentation so that you can be a part of our conversation. With that, we'll get started.
So welcome everyone. I'm Lynda Fote. This is MaryAnn Joseph. But the truth is we've been working together for so long that we're moderately interchangeable. So it probably doesn't matter.
What you can look alike.
Yeah, well, a little greater. So today's discussion is based on the book that MaryAnn and I wrote called On the Road to Student Success. And it's really a way for teachers to think about lesson planning. We are both classroom teachers, but we've also spent a number of years working with teachers, really around the whole idea of instruction. What should a lesson look like in your classroom? And what are some strategies that you can use as you're working with that huge range of students that you have in your class? And after a number of years of doing that, it really occurred to us that we needed a format to put that in, a way to be more intentional as we plan lessons, to really get the most bang for the buck possible.
Yeah, a little bit of our background. We'll talk about our individual background in just a few slides, but we worked together, working for change in schools in New Jersey with groups of teachers that were dedicated to that change, certainly motivated by some state regulations. During that work, we got to know teachers, and we found that one of the most widespread questions was, so how do we do this? Because kids are different, because you don't really understand the kids in my classroom, because some of these kids are really hard to teach. And based in the research, most current research that we were using in our presentations, we decided to formalize the process we've been doing, the thinking we did as classroom teachers, and really put together a framework that helps us to think through some of the hardest challenges in regard to application of some of those good strategies to the classroom in order to make a difference.
I'm actually not a fan of reading slides to teachers because the truth is you can all read and I find it moderately insulting. However, I'm going to read this one out loud because I do believe that this centers us on the discussion for today. This is really what MaryAnn and I believe. As teachers, this is our obligation, and we say that because we believe it's true. This is our obligation, a daily challenge on the road to success, to continually, relentlessly become students of our students, to become accomplished teachers, and to use that knowledge, that power, to design lessons that promise success for each student.
You know, if you look at the research, particularly the work of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, which I'm proud to say I am recognized as a National Board certified teacher, our profession is calling us to this. It's calling us to this on a national level, on a state level, and on an individual level in our classrooms with our kids each day. It really is not just a set of words that is on the slide, but really the mission of our work. We need to look at those students and decide what they need, how we as teachers can be the best for them. There's so much information out there about social emotional learning, individualization, differentiation, adaptation, modification, and a slew of other words that keep reminding us that the student in front of us is the one that's the most important. And we as teachers, we're called every day to make sure that that student, that individual student, becomes a part of the learning that we're doing in that classroom.
Yeah, I admit to not being very sporty, and I find sportscasters annoying because they have this vocabulary they use. But at the end of every game, they always say, they all left it out on the floor today, or they all left it out on the field today, or they all left it out somewhere today. But the truth is, that's what teachers do every day. You leave it all in the classroom. I often say to teachers that, here's the difference. You can go home at the end of the day tired and frustrated and exhausted, or you can go home at the end of the day exhausted, but really happy with what happened in your classroom today. Feeling accomplished, feeling as though what you did today really made a difference in the lives of your kids. And that's what we're aiming for. There's nothing that's not going to make this hard. There's nothing that's not going to make this exhausting. But that feeling of success is what gets us out of bed every morning and sends us back for another day.
Yeah, and even though we don't have to get out of bed, we still do.
Yeah, I know.
So, so the first thing, oops, I might have skipped a slide. Hold on. Oh, I am good. Okay, sorry. So this slide then calls us to look at that quote, the conversation, listen to the conversation that we invited. And it invites you to the chat room for the first time. So hopefully you found your chat room. And what you want to do is think about a word that stands out to you. When you think about lesson planning, and be honest, is it the word frustrated? Or is it just the word Sunday night or Monday morning? I don't know where you're at on that lesson planning. Is it the word responsibility? Is it the word always changing? I know some of those are 2 words, but you can put a hyphen in it and call it one. What word stands out to you when you think about lesson planning? Write your answers in the chat. And we'll talk about a few of those as we open up this conversation about lesson planning. What's the reason that you came to listen to us? What is it about lesson planning that stands out as a challenge, or if you're an administrator listening, that stands out as an observation that you see where teachers need maybe support or help or success? Objectives. Thanks, Lawrence. That's cool. Time consuming, right?
Yes. I started teaching in 1968, which please don't subtract because it just makes me really old. But I used to have like 6 boxes of the lesson plan for the day. Now I look at teachers' lesson plans and they are much more.
Assessment. Well, that's actually one of our, we'll talk about the whole book in a minute, but I think evaluation, probably the most missing, right? The most missing in lesson plans that I see. How are we going to really find out where the kids are learning what they're supposed to be learning? So great word.
And commitment.
Yeah,
good one.
We talked a lot about that. But what was your favorite word?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm into relentless these days.
Oh, I kind of like that.
Kind of my mantra.
Right. I think my word is order. I think a lot of teachers think about differentiation and application and accommodation, but there's just so much in front of them.
Right.
They don't know how to put it in place to make it effective.
So maybe choices.
Well, choices. Excuse me.
Turn off the alarm.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Let's move on.
We'll move on to our next slide that gives you a chance to just hear a little bit about who we are. Not that we want to keep prolonging that, but I always wonder to myself, why should I listen to the people in front of me? And so we just want to give you a little bit of perspective about lesson planning, where it was in our lives, and what we bring to this conversation.
Well, I've already admitted to starting teaching in 1968, which means I now have a 50-year career. What's frightening is some of my original 4th graders are probably thinking about retirement now. Isn't that a great insight?
That's pretty awesome.
That's pretty awesome. I taught in regular ed. I taught in special ed. I worked in special ed schools. I worked in public schools. I was also what in New Jersey is called a learning consultant, which means I planned programs for kids with special needs. And the last 22 years, I have been on the road working in public schools with teachers, working on lesson planning and lesson design.
I come from, I've been in the field of education since the 70s, not the 60s, and that makes me younger than Lynda, just saying. But anyway, I come from the perspective of a wide range, and that is because my husband was a Navy officer for 26 years, so we were in a lot of different states. And so I have the perspective of seeing a little bit of Rhode Island, a little bit of California, and a little bit of Virginia, and a little bit of Georgia, and a little bit of Hawaii, and bringing all that together to have this conversation that sort of is widespread and expansive. I find that in each of those places, the questions are the same. There's a sameness, regardless of where we're standing. Maybe there's a bit of an accent difference when we give our questions, maybe a little bit of a drawl in Georgia, and maybe a little bit less of a drawl in Rhode Island. But the question is the same. How do we do the work of education in a different way? How do we do it better? How do we really meet our kids? And that conversation was heightened for me when I pursued national board certification, that asked me to think about these students in this time and in this place. And it became a grounding that was very common when I met Lynda. We met through some work with the New Jersey Department of Ed. When I met Lynda and started talking about these students in this time and in this place, how is education going to be really focused for them in this place? We found a lot of commonality in that conversation. And from that, wanted to put together a foundation, platform, I guess, of thinking that would be easy for teachers, that doesn't erase the commitment or the fact that we need to focus on objectives and assessment, as you also rightfully put into that chat, but it maybe does give order to it and make it less confusing. And so that brings us to a bit of an introduction on this book and how it's set up. So we have put together a conversation around lesson planning that focuses on some alliterative words that we think work together as a frame. Lesson planning that starts with population and destination, moves to anticipation and transportation, and then comes through evaluation and celebration to put together a way of thinking that is easy to understand and build a conversation no matter what format or lesson plan is required by a district or a school.
Right, teachers should never panic when they see this. We're not about to change the way your lesson plans look. This is really about the thinking that teachers do as they're planning. And my guess is most all of you do this intuitively anyway. We've just tried to be a little more intentional here and to lay out for you what we think happens in putting a lesson plan together.
So today's conversation is a bit of an explanation, a bit of an introduction to a book that is laid out chapter by chapter with those big ideas. Gotta give Lynda credit for the words. She put them together, and then we kind of, I don't know, gave them some body as we put the book together. But the whole idea of thinking from population to destination to anticipation to transportation to evaluation and celebration was the way that we, as two folks who've been in the profession for a while, would have a conversation that made sense and was approachable for teachers. Not some big, giant thing that we had to always sit and feel overwhelmed by. But when we talk in friendly words about population and destination, maybe some of those big ideas get easier to understand. Today's conversation is going to focus on the first two of the chapters, population and destination. We're going to give you a little bit of a look into how the book explains the concept as a part of the lesson planning conversation, and then some of the strategies or ways that teachers might work in a classroom to really address that component of planning with all students in mind, or planning for student success.
Yeah, the truth is that population and destination really happen at the same time, but because of our emphasis on who you teach, we always talk about population first. This is really about putting the kids at the center of the conversation. It's April. I will guarantee any classroom teacher who's on this webinar has a kid in your class that is still surprising you. Sometimes they surprise you the good way. Gee, I didn't know you really knew that. Or I didn't know you could do that. Unfortunately, sometimes they surprise you in the other way. Oh dear, I kind of thought we had that mastered, or I thought I understood how you would approach that. So for me, population is not a one-shot deal. It's not, I walk in September and I learn all their names and we're good to go. It's really a year's worth of work. The hard part then is you send them off and somebody else starts all over again next September.
So our book is laid out with these big ideas as chapters. And this particular book, this particular chapter of the book, population, talks about some things that teachers might concentrate on or ways that they can find out more about that population and then apply it to the lesson planning template, which we'll show you in just a few slides. Each of our chapters has a
Objective.
thank you, an objective.
Okay.
I forgot that word.
That's all right.
Okay, so has an objective that we aim for, just as a lesson plan would aim for. So why are we teaching you became some of the questions that we asked ourselves as we put the work together.
Yeah, so at the end of chapter 1, you would be able to identify some specific learner strengths and challenges and understand how these interact to create the unique learners we work with every day. My first 4th grade class had 30 kids in it. I have a picture of them. It's amazing. They look so, I look exhausted.
You
But
look
they look
very young.
Yeah, I look very young, but they look really good. And I still remember some of their names. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, amazing.
The 2 sitting in front in the class picture, the one little boy, he said to me the second week of school, Miss Rosal, that was my name in those days, do you know why this ear is longer than this ear? I said, no, Paul, why is this ear longer than this ear? Because in kindergarten, Ms. Blacken pulled on it. You know, he could have been the ADHD poster boy, and somewhere along the way, he missed phonics. He was in 4th grade, and he couldn't decode at all. Sitting next to Jonathan, who could read Shakespeare. I don't know how much Shakespeare he understood, but he could read every word in every book. So, you know, that's what your classrooms look like, the range of kids. That's what makes it interesting, but that's what makes it exhausting. So we really want to take a look at how we identify those strengths and how we identify those challenges.
And in the book, what you'll find is conversation based on a background of what this objective looks like. Why is population important? Our sample that we're sharing with you today about population leads us to the conversation, the current conversation in our profession now that talks about learner variability and the fact that teachers really need to understand that there is no average student. That a lot of this work comes out of CAST, the Center for Applied Scientific Technology. And in the book, we give a general background knowledge so that teachers understand that in their lesson planning, this is an integral part, and in fact, important and foundational. There was conversation about whether destination or population should be first. We decided that the conversation leads from the students that we work with. But we wanted teachers to know why. Why is that so important? Well, certainly with SEL on the horizon now, it's even more important. SEL, social and emotional learning, being integral into how students connect and attach to the information, why they would relate to the information being shared in the classroom, and how they can become a part of it. But here, our conversation was a reminder about this no average learner, about the fact that the word average is illusory, a quote from CAST and their work on learner variability, saying it's an illusion to think that there's an average student. Sometimes teachers need to hear that so that they can move forward and understand that variability is normal and systematic and therefore should be a conscious, intentional part. And Lynda used the word intentional very well when we first began, because this is an intentional part of lesson planning to know that there is no average student and then be able to say, I can't plan for average. Books, textbooks, teachers, guides, they have the average student in mind. Now, many of them have adaptations for the higher students and the lower students these days. But teachers tend to go to the middle. And there's a lot to do. I'm not putting them down for doing it. But this reminder in our book is about how do we address the not average? What do we do about that? And our book is filled with answers. Lynda, I'll let you talk.
So this is one of the things that we focus on as we go through some of the lessons we've included in the book. Often when I lesson plan with teachers, we identify 3 kids in the classroom to think about in greater depth. So on this little chart, Jack is the kid in your class who is struggling. Life is hard for him in the classroom. Very little seems to come easy. William is the kid who's floating along at the top. not needing much help from you, getting really good test scores. I mean, William makes you look good when the test scores come out. And Sonia is the child in the middle, plugging along, not bothering anybody, doing her best. And here's what I find is challenging for us as teachers. When we make a list for Jack, we tend to write down all the things he has trouble with. And my challenge to you would be to write down at least as many things in that list that he's good at least as many things that we can use as strengths for him as a learner. With William, it is our tendency to just write down all the things he's good at, because he's good at a lot, but also to identify some places where he could improve, where he could work a little harder, where he could get a little extra help from the teacher to come up even further in some of those skills. And here's what we find when we talk about Sonia. She's the kid in April who's still a mystery to us. Teachers have the hardest time writing down things for that kid who's plugging along in the middle. Not bothering anybody, she's passing. So just to get to know her better, Jack will make himself known to you if it's too hard for him. William will make himself known for you if it's too easy for him. Sonia just raises her hand once a week and she's good to go. So we really use this as an opportunity for us to look more carefully at our students. Some of the things on this list could come from a test score, but most of it comes from observing kids at work, from having conversations with them, from looking at what they can do as a learner.
And in that light, the book continues to provide, because we found some things that for each of these chapters are kind of go-tos for us. Lynn, you took this from some of the suggestions from research.
Yeah, and this looks very different than the original chart that I saw because I wanted to make it fit for us. But I began to think about kids who come to us with high readiness skills. They come with a lot. They come from homes where people read to them, with their books and materials, where they go on trips. And there are kids who come to us with what we think of as a medium level of readiness, and kids who come with low readiness. They're the ones who walk into kindergarten the first day of school and hold the book upside down and backwards and can't figure out how to open it because they've never had access to a book. We also have kids on the left-hand side who are really your traditional learners. They fit well in your very traditional listen, read, fill out the paperwork, do the workbook page, take the test. There are kids who are kind of medium in terms of their capability in a traditional classroom. And there are some kids that you put in a highly traditional classroom who struggle all the time. And so I think when we look at kids, they tend to fall into these 9 different categories here, right? This is probably William in the high readiness spot. He's a 9. I just gave him a number so we would understand it. And Jack was probably a 1. Okay? That he's a kid who struggles in that very traditional classroom. It doesn't come with a lot of skills. I don't have a miracle that's going to take Jack from being a 1 to a 9, but if I build some background knowledge for him on the readiness list, he could go from a 1 to a 2. If I put Jack in a classroom that's more interactive and more hands-on, more collaborative, he could go from a 1 to 2 in that sense. In other words, we can begin to move a struggling learner up and across this chart if we really think about what they need to be successful. So this is just something I like to look at every once in a while to just remind myself that kids start in very different places in your classroom.
And one of the things that you can talk about or see in the book as ways that not only we can have the conversation, but we can have a better discussion about what we do when we see these things. What you'll see that kind of grounds the entire book is a template. I've shown you only part of it so you're not overwhelmed by it at first, but the template asks us to sit down and think, as we're lesson planning, 2 questions. What makes my learners unique? And how did I learn this information? And as teachers grow to get comfortable with those 2 questions, maybe they'll go back to the book for some of the strategies. Well, I don't know this information, so I need to learn more. What do Lynda and MaryAnn say about ways to find out more about my population? Or what makes my learners unique? That's an easier question perhaps for me than to talk about 2 or 3 or 4 ways to differentiate and modify, because maybe not all of those are the ones that I need for this lesson at this time in this place for these kids. The template is a thinking box. It's a starting point, might actually be used even in a grade level group to think about our learners and what they are bringing to the table so we can plan with that in mind. I want to talk more about the template before I move on to the chat room.
No, I think that population for me is where we start. It's where we always start. I worked for a while in a school where at the end of every lesson, teachers needed to provide 3 different tasks for kids to do, a high, a medium, and a low.
Yeah.
And one day in a moment of frustration, I said, and why? Because sometimes 3 is not enough. Sometimes you've got kids who are outliers who need even more challenge or even more support. And the truth is, sometimes you don't need 3 different tasks. Sometimes a task is open-ended enough, or sometimes a task comes with enough teacher support. If you don't know who you're teaching, it's hard to organize that. It's hard to figure out how much differentiation you need to do on any single lesson. So I always put the kids first in that conversation.
So let's open up the chat room again, give you an opportunity to think about some of the things we've talked about with population. Here's our question. What makes your learners unique, and how do you learn that information in the classroom? What is it that you pause on? How does that happen right now in your room? What do you do? Or what do you have your teachers do if you're an administrator? And as they write, I don't know, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm in a lot of classrooms these days where there are multiple kids with IEPs.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's certainly one thing. And what we know is if you've got 3 kids with IEPs, those are 3 kids that are nothing like each other. So
Right.
that just identifying the kids with IEPs doesn't always help.
Right.
We've certainly got more kids with other language backgrounds in our classrooms, which is something I never had in the early days of
No, I
teaching.
agree. Yeah, that really is
a lot more with that. I also think we have a lot more kids who come with really varied experiences before they come to school in terms of vocabulary and background knowledge. MaryAnn knows I'm obsessed with the kids' vocabulary.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in that, and we share a lot of that in the book. I would say, yeah, unmatched background knowledge, I would agree. I also think that this whole idea of social and emotional learning is really becoming bigger in our schools, really a lot bigger. So, college level diverse, yeah. So, right, you're talking from the perspective of the students in front of you, but if you were sharing this with your students, maybe they'd be saying some of the things we talk about. But thanks, Janice, that's a good thought. They're very diverse academic experiences, actually, for all learners in the classroom, right? Just a lot of levels going on these days.
Right. Well, even in a college class these days, we work with, teachers who are coming into the profession who are still college students. You see they're all over the place in terms of their background. Yeah. Lawrence talks about IEPs and ESL as well. Yeah. I find that's pretty common.
I agree, but it's social emotional, the level of emotion or emotional support that students need seems to be different for me these days. And so all of those things come together in this chapter with a lot of strategies that can be used or teachers can think about. But then as we opened with an objective, we also closed with a takeaway. And this is a fun takeaway, I guess.
Well, so we did a PLC guide to go with the book, and there are lots of questions for teachers to answer, but then we tried to be a little clever. So the close for the population section is: you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. I'm a Dr. Seuss fan. But what I know is that every kid I ever had in class was ready to learn. I just didn't always know how to make that happen.
That's right.
No kid comes to school saying, gee, I'd like to be a failure today. Gee, I'd like to not do any work and have the teacher mad at me.
And so it's not, no parents sending their worst kid. They're sending the best they've got.
Right.
They're not keeping somebody else home.
No, huh?
No, they're not. They're sending them. And so I think sometimes we have to, that kind of focuses that the work in front of us is for the kids of them.
Absolutely. And so I have never had a student who couldn't learn.
Right.
I just had some kids that I didn't understand yet.
Right. So this kind of gives you an overall view of like what is involved in chapter 1 with a little bit of our background in storytelling. But we set out a framework. Population is important to address. So what is it? And what does the research tell us? And why are we talking about it? Why is it important? And then, okay, now that we know it's important, what do we do about it? What are some strategies or ways? We'll do that with one more of the chapters. We'll talk ourselves through destination. Again, destination, it's almost at the same time, right? That we talk about where we're going and who's going with us, right? But this idea or this concept of all getting in the bus and going together is part of what our analogy is about, right? So we are all on the road to student success. That's what the title of our book says. And the second thing, which might argue could be the first thing, is this chapter 2 in destination.
So at the end of this chapter, teachers will be able to write objectives that guide you in designing lessons that meet student needs. And I know that in many districts now, the objectives are given to you. There is a curriculum that has objectives in it. And so we take a look at that and we think how we need to look more deeply at those objectives to figure out how to get every kid there.
So it was Lawrence who said objectives from the beginning, right? I mean, we write lessons just like we write our chapters with objectives or a place to go. But I gotta say, one of the things I find across the board, no matter where I'm at, if I'm in a district that's affluent, if I'm in a district that is needful, if I'm with teachers who get it and they've been in the profession for 10 years, if I'm in a place where there's brand new teachers, this idea of what the objective is for our learning is not spent enough time. Yeah, there's too much assumption. We just read from that teacher book and we think, okay, that's it. Sometimes it's just not. So
I think if you flip us over to the objective that's in here, is that the next slide? Yes. Okay, so we created a unit of study in the book for a second grade classroom about weather. We have some high school ones, some middle school ones, but we took an objective right from the Common Core. We've all changed our language to meet the Common Core. I used to say find supporting details. Now I say cite textual evidence. But cite textual evidence that most strongly supports the analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. The problem is that that doesn't tell us what the kids need to demonstrate mastery of this objective. What skills do they need to have before it even starts? So if you could flip us over to the next one. So in order to do this, I need to know, can every student in my classroom read the text? If not, they don't have a shot at meeting this objective. They can't read the book. What do I do about that? Do they understand the text? Because I got some kids who can decode, but when you ask them a question, I don't know what planet they're on, okay? Do they understand the concept of inference? And we do a lot of lessons where we use other than text to teach kids about making inferences. The difference between a fact and an inference is a rather large mystery to a lot of 8, 9, 10, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, all right? Can they make appropriate inferences? Can they find evidence? Can they find evidence that strongly supports? And can they explain their decisions? That's a lot of subsets to one objective. But if I don't understand those, and if I don't understand where kids fall in that list, then I don't have a shot at anybody meeting this objective. So maybe for Jack, it's about can he read the text, because we can't get any further until we resolve that problem. For Sonia, it may be, can she find the evidence? Because she's kind of got some of this, but maybe not all of it. For William, it might be finding the evidence that strongly supports or explaining that in writing. So while I may have a single objective for every kid in that class, the subsets of those objectives may be different for different kids as we work our way through the process.
And spending time here helps us all to understand the specially designed instruction. That's words from our national IDEA regulation that is needed in IEPs. So often teachers are asking me, but man, not everybody can do this.
Right.
It's a third grade objective, but I've got kids who can't read. So again, leaving everything on the field, as you talked about, I think that analogy, that's pretty good. If I leave everything out on the field, what I have to come to this objective with is, I've got some kids who can't read the text. How am I still going to get them to the objective? How am I going to specially design the instruction to get there? And so this chapter helps teachers to break down those objectives into the learning and then what supports the learning. And we've got strategies in there as well. But what we've got is examples of how we've taken an objective, then broken it down so that teachers can see some of the thought process that they would go into to connect the destination with the population.
I would say every kid in your classroom can meet that objective. They just can't meet it in the same way, at the same pace, with the same materials. And so that's really what that chapter is about.
So I'm going to flip to, and I revealed more of the template so that you can see that this is the kinds of conversations that are moving us to kind of creating that lesson plan or that end result that's going to get us somewhere. Now, I must say, we tend to be unit oriented when we place these down. This is not necessarily as effective daily because the conversation is really big, but it is effective for a couple of days worth of work or units worth of work.
Well, I find if we plan big, we plan a whole unit, then we've got the big work done so that we can make the little adjustments day to day that we need to. No matter how well you plan, there's always the surprise.
Right.
And
this chat window, I invite you to add to, but maybe I just want to also just pause here for a moment to say a little bit more about that destination. When teachers can articulate the destination and figure out what it is that kids are going to be able to do to know that it happened, all of a sudden the planning becomes easy.
Well, you and I are in a lot of different schools.
Yeah.
And there may be several days in a week where I'm someplace I've never been before. And my first question is, can you give me an exact address? I need to know not just the town, not just the street. I need to know the zip code. I need to know the street. I need all of that. So I'm not driving around lost and late first thing in the morning. And I think that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I mean, these days you don't even know what door to open at a school.
No,
it's really hard. But I think that conversation does translate very easily into what teachers are saying. There is a lot of frustration out there. Oh, these objectives are too hard. My kids aren't ready for it. I'm teaching stuff that I never taught in the third grade, the first grade, the second grade. I get that. I understand. But let's just break down that objective. What is it that we want kids to learn, and how do we know? Like, what does it look like when kids know, how do we know that learning has occurred? It reminds me of the conversation we were having earlier about choice boards. One of the things that you'll see in this chapter, how do we set forth choices for kids so that they can show the learning that we expect? And so the unit is filled with not just the background of what is destination, but what are some of the good conversations, and then how do we get, what is it that we want to see with kids? And we've developed 8 units of study that teachers can walk through. So
there's one that goes with each chapter, so yeah.
It's also a good opportunity to talk about the PLC book. We want to talk about how we put that together from some of the work that you're teaching.
Well, we use the PLC guide that goes with the book as a way to give teachers a place to write down their ideas, so that if you're working with each other, you come to that discussion with things to share. And we end each one with a takeaway, and this is my Linda Barrett quote. If you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. We've all had those moments.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely.
And so the PLC actually gives teachers some reflection.
Yeah, places to stop and think about what's going on in your classroom, and kind of breaks the chapters down into less intimidating chunks. So you can stop and talk about your kids. So if it was a grade level team, or at the high school or middle school level, it might be a content area team that's working on that. and gives them some tools to use then for lesson planning.
Yeah, some of the things that we find is that a lot of our work is sometimes with new teachers, new teacher teams. That's their first step. And we hope this book sort of becomes that buddy that you can open up when your administrator's not there or your peer teacher's not there. You go, okay, if I just know the population and the destination, then maybe I can figure out how to get through the anticipation of transportation, have that conversation.
Well, the transportation chapter is really the longest because it's chock full of instructional strategies that we have developed and collected from teachers over a long period of time.
Yeah, so we've talked to you a little bit about how we've set up the two beginning chapters, population and destination. The arrows that come together are intentional. We say that those two conversations come together, and what's in the middle is the setup for the lesson planning. We follow these two chapters. Oh, you know what? I should let you tell this story first. So
okay.
Let me pause, and then I'll tell you about the other chapters. So let me pause and say, population and destination leads us to an amazing story that Lynda came up with in her New Jersey travels. And if you know anything about New Jersey, traffic and how to get around traffic is a part of it. So go for it.
Those of you who don't live in New Jersey probably don't understand a traffic circle. So this may not mean much to you, but they're everywhere here. Right. So one morning I'm on my way to a workshop and I'm headed down a road that I know well. And I come to a traffic circle, and parked directly across the traffic circle where I need to go is a police car with a very stern police officer standing in front of it. The road is closed. There'd been a flood the night before and the bridge was out. I literally drove around the circle 3 times while I tried to figure out what to do, because GPS didn't know there'd been a flood. She was just yelling at me. And by the 3rd time around, I had figured out that there was another road some distance to the north that ran parallel to this. And so I drove up there, made a left, and arrived at the workshop, since I'm always early, on time. But it got me to thinking about kids in our classrooms and how they approach learning. We have some kids who come to a traffic circle, a stop in that lesson, who just go a half turn around and they're headed straight out. They're good to go. You've got other kids who could go around the traffic circle and then might take a parallel path because they don't need everything that's on this route. They already mastered half of the objectives. They just need to, and then you've got a kid like Jack, remember Jack, who may need to drive around the traffic circle 3 or 4 times. I'm telling you this from years of experience. He is not wasting time. He is not fooling around. He is not unwilling to do it. He just needs more time to figure out what to do. He may need for you to get in the car with him and get out the map and show him the alternate route. But my experience working with a lot of kids with special needs is they don't set out to get lost. They don't set out to be late. They just run into a barrier and they don't know what to do. And that's our job.
And that's our job. So population and destination, the foundation of what we have been talking about today, is followed up in the book with anticipation and transportation. How do I set up the lesson? How do I get kids connected? I don't like the word engaged anymore. It's just overused, but I like the word connected. How do we use what we know to make this relevant for kids, to get them engaged, to become facilitators as teachers, and not just the sage who's giving information to them for them to use?
So it's all the stuff we need to do before the lesson starts. So do we need to do some vocabulary building for a kid like Jack?
You've said
find a higher, I know, and I'll say it 3 more times before we're done. You know I'm obsessed. Do we need to find a higher level reading material for William? You know, do I need to think about what cooperative group Sonia will work in so that she has the chance to star in that group? You know, that's all this. There's no lesson going on here.
Right.
You know?
And so after we explain anticipation and reference back to some of the current research in the field, what we do is we put lots of strategies in there. So try this if you want to get kids engaged.
How do I know?
What happens? You know, what choices can I make? That's what teachers most ask from us, right?
Right.
They ask, well, how
what do I do now?
Yeah, right. Which if you could see the parts of my office that aren't shown in the video, you would see that we have a lot of folders with those ideas around,
stuff.
but you're not going to get to see that. And then we move to transportation. How are we carrying the message that we've defined in destination to those students? So transportation, kind of a platform for the instruction, right? We move from there to our last two chapters, evaluation, that assessment that Lawrence, you talked about from the beginning. Lesson plannings are about, do we know if we got there? And then finally, reflection, and not just reflection, but reflection because I'm a national board teacher, right? Have to be reflecting on what we did. Did it work? Did it not work? How are we going to do it again to celebration, right? Because so many teachers, when they get to the end of the learning, forget to pause and say, we did that. And the we did that is important. We know it from social and emotional learning and the new work that's out, but we know that as humans, that just helps us to continue to remain connected and engaged.
It's really important for me to make sure we have this chapter because like a lot of teachers, I am a chronic overplanner.
Yeah.
My security blanket as a teacher was that I would absolutely never run out of things to do. You know, there would never be a moment in the classroom when I couldn't fill that empty space.
I know.
The problem then is that I got really obsessed with finishing my list, and the thing that always fell off because time was up was that opportunity for not only teachers to reflect, but for kids to reflect, and for us to have a chance to really celebrate the learning. And celebration is also on here for me as an equity issue, because you may have kids in your class working on very different levels of work, reading books that are not at all alike in terms of the reading level that's required, or in terms of the kinds of questions that you're asking them. And so giving every kid in your class a chance to share with every other kid in the class and get a round of applause for what they have accomplished, to me is really one of the most important things we can do as teachers. So we need not to, just because we've gotten to the assessment piece doesn't mean we're done.
And so that's what we wanted to share with you today. We wanted to share this outline and really delve into a couple of the things. We thought the first two would be the best. To think about lesson planning in a framework that is big, helpful, supportive of the thought process that gets us from the objective to the assessment, with kids doing the learning, not just being told about the knowledge. We have used population, destination, anticipation, transportation, evaluation, reflection, and celebration as the framework for being on a road to success, where students all find success regardless of their needs, regardless of who they are, and regardless of what they need from us as teachers. We'll end here with questions that you might pose to us, or an opportunity in the chat room to talk about how this outline, I don't know, connects with what you think, or how might it change the conversation in your school.
Thank you, MaryAnn and Lynda. I'm sure our attendees will be doing some reflecting and celebrating based off this content. I do have a few questions that I've gathered here. How can I use this lesson planning format with my required form?
Yeah, well, I worked for special services teams for a long time, and we created probably more paperwork than anybody else on the face of the earth. So our idea here is not to create more paper for you, it's to guide your thinking so that you use whatever form your district requires of you. My guess is that destination and evaluation are probably both on that form somewhere. And then you think about the other things that may not be on that form as part of that lesson plan. This is really an intellectual exercise, not a paperwork one, at least not from our perspective. Right?
Yeah, and I just put those words kind of succinctly in the chat room for you too. This doesn't replace your lesson planning form, but it does give you an outline or a format to guide your thinking.
How can this content be a grade level planning tool?
Grade level, I think the PLC guide really works.
Yeah, that,
oops, sorry.
we really like to work with teams of teachers, particularly when we're spending time in school districts rather than doing more workshop kinds of things. And the PLC guide really helps I think those teams work their way through this. So I would definitely suggest, I mean, that comes with the book. It's
Yeah,
the book.
comes with the book. Yes,
So
it does.
that's a tool for teachers to use.
In your mind, which of the topics is the most important to you? Population, destination, anticipation? Which one of those is the most important to you?
Well, MaryAnn knows I'm all about who you teach. You know, like that to me, it's not a matter of anything not being important, but if you don't know the kids, I think the other decisions you make, you get a lot less bang for the buck. So I always err on the side of knowing the kids better.
So I'm tempted to say destination just for the fact that so many teachers have that as the first question. But I think what I'm going to end up saying is the anticipation. Because what anticipation does is it flips the conversation from being the teacher is giving knowledge to the teacher is encouraging the students to become learners.
Okay.
And if they could really do that, right? It's a challenge for teachers these days. But if they could do that just in little ways, right, then we change the dynamic of the classroom. I'm in classrooms, and I've been really impressed because what's happening in classrooms is people are getting rid of their tables and chairs. So now you walk into a room, and it's I don't know, I'm bad with space, 40 by 40, I don't know, 20 by, whatever it is, 6 feet by 6 feet, whatever it is. Maybe it's long, it's 6 feet, maybe it's 20 by 20, I don't know. Anyway, but the whole place has like chairs that you'd see at a bar, or it has soft chairs in the corner, or maybe it has a place to lean on, and it gives you the impression that this is owned by the students, not constructed by the teachers, right? So all of a sudden, it's like, how'd they get there? How'd they want to do that learning? I saw a kid in front of me cry because the bell rang. And the teacher had to go over and comfort him and tell him he had more time tomorrow. When was the last time we saw that? Right? Teacher's like, oh my gosh, the bell, we gotta get out of here. And he was going to gym. He wanted to finish these things. So I think anticipation, if teachers can realize they are the squad against the kids.
We say to teachers that this kind of work in classrooms requires superb classroom management skills, because it wasn't something I learned when I went to teacher school. You know, like I learned how to stand up in front and be in charge and make them all listen to me.
Right.
And I learned how to do that. But when I started making more opportunities for the kids to be in charge, I really needed to manage very differently. And so I think that's another challenge that's embedded here.
So Ryan, I see time is getting tight, and I just wanted to say to the people that are listening, we wrote this so that the conversation would be richer about what we do in classrooms. We wrote it because we're teachers, and we thought from a teacher perspective on how that change happens. And we hope we wrote it in the friendly sense that you might have guessed from our interplay here, that it's doable. We're able to do this. We can make a change that really gives us lessons that maximize student learning for all those kids, even the hard ones. You know, the book is full of strategies, and teachers who read the book or work with us give us an opportunity to showcase theirs too. So we share that on the website. We have a website, Lynda and I, where we post those samples of how teachers have used this framework and really created some dynamite lessons. And a lot of people in New Jersey are using it as a resource because we in New Jersey teach the same things at the same time. But no matter where you are, they're good examples of how these words kind of guide that